One, rolling.
Hi, and welcome to the,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. Country.
Hi. Hi, and welcome to the, what is it, the contract? I forgot it.
Understanding the
Understanding
contract.
contract.
Yeah, just say anything.
Shit, sorry. Hi, and welcome to Understanding Your Contract segment of our home buying series. I'm Scott Tucker with PHH Home Loans.
And I'm Tracy Oliver, a realtor with Coldwell Banker.
Tracy, the buyer has been qualified to buy a home. They have been looking for homes, and you've taken them through that process, and they found a house that they have interest in.
Right.
Please take us through the process. Now that they know they have a house, what is the next step?
Well, the next step is to sit down with the buyer and work with their agent who knows the market trends and is very familiar with the overall market conditions, and to look at the specific comps, recent sales in the neighborhood where their house they're looking at is, and take a look at what those homes sold for, what those homes had in terms of features, when those homes sold in comparative to market conditions, and to really understand the possible market value of the home that they're looking at, so they can make a fair market value offer based on facts. And so we'll look at the recent sales, recent comps, we'll look at the market trends, whether or not sellers are paying buyers' closing costs. We'll look at the type of property it is, whether it's a regular sale, a foreclosure, or a short sale. Get a sense if there is other offers that are on the table, how long the property has been on the market. We'll take all of this information and sit down with the buyer and use our expertise and knowledge of understanding the current market trends and conditions, and work with the buyer to help them formulate an offer that hopefully will be in line with what the seller is accepting, so we can find a meeting of the minds, and if the buyer is interested in buying this house, find a fair market value for them. So that's our first step, is to look at the facts and look at the information.
So once you have all that information, then you can actually physically write a contract and make an offer. And so what happens from there? You're making that offer, you're submitting that to the selling side.
Absolutely.
What happens there?
Well, we'll put the offer together, and we'll work with the other side of the transaction, usually agent to agent, in negotiating. And what will happen once the offer is written and sent over to the other side, the seller will do one of three things. They will accept the offer, they will reject the offer, or they will counter the offer. Typically what we see is the seller comes back and counters the offer, and we go back and forth with the written offer. It's all done in writing on the contract, and the seller will come back to us with a counter that may be price, it may be some of the terms, such as the settlement date. There may be some other things that need to be countered in terms of items that convey with the property, some of the dates that we've specified for some of our timelines. The seller may need to adjust to meet their schedule. So we go back and forth, and once that everybody, both the buyer and the seller, have agreed to all of the final terms and have signed off on those terms, what we have then is a ratified contract.
Terrific. And so really everything has to be in writing. There's no verbal commitments to anything. Everything has to be in writing for that to be considered to be ratified, correct?
Absolutely. In Virginia, we require all terms to be in writing and signed off by all parties to be valid.
Excellent, excellent. Well, now that you're in that step and you have a ratified contract and you have a happy buyer that's going to buy their house of their dreams, and you have a seller that's selling their home, what is the next step in reference to that? What happens with the contract at this point?
Well, at that point, we've got the ratified contract. The buyer is going to be working with the lender, and we'll talk about that in great detail in one of our other segments. But the buyer's agent is going to help manage the overall transaction. Specified in the contract that all parties have agreed to are a number of terms, and with those terms there's a number of deadlines. So we've got a timeline that we need to follow in order to meet the terms of the contract. One of the things that's important to note is that the contract has been written with some terms that do protect the buyer, and those terms are contingencies. A contingency is a condition that must be satisfied by a certain time in order for the contract to be binding. And one of the contingencies that we'll talk about first is the both finance contingency and the appraisal contingencies. And these are contingencies that are written in the contract, but they're things that are tied into working with your lender, the loan process. And we'll talk about those in another segment. The lender will order an appraisal, and the property will need to appraise for at least the contract sales price.
Right, right.
And once those items are completed, those contingencies will be removed. Another important contingencies, especially for first-time buyer, is the home inspection contingency. The buyer will, and I recommend that the buyer does attend the home inspection. The buyer will hire a third-party professional licensed qualified home inspector, and they will come through the property and work with the buyer. The buyer typically is recommended to follow along. The buyer will learn a lot about the home. It's not just about finding defects or finding concerns not to buy the house. They're also going to be learning and having a little bit of an orientation about their house, how things work, some maintenance pointers, a little bit of an understanding, if you will, of how your new home will work, since you will now be a homeowner. So it's important that the buyer attends there. But the home inspection is the opportunity, if there are any things in the home that need to be corrected, there is a period of time where the seller will then be requested to make those repairs, and then everybody again negotiates that part of the process. Seller will probably agree to some of those, will counter a little bit, and then once that is agreed to in writing by both parties, that contingency is removed. The other contingency that we typically have in this area is both review of homeowner association and condominium documentation if the property that the purchaser is buying falls into a community that is subject to those rules and regulations. The buyer actually in Virginia has a 3-day right of rescission to review the HOA and condominium documents. That's another contingency, that once those documents are received, the buyer then has those 3 days. We manage that. Once that period of time is passed, then we check that box and we move on to the next contingency. So again, there's a lot of things that have to happen in sequence and within the time frame that has been determined and agreed upon in the contract, but we manage all of those details as the buyer agent, assisting the buyer through some uncharted territory, but all very important steps to getting from ratified contract to settlement.
Excellent. Tracy, so there's a lot of things that actually continue to go on even after that contract is written and accepted.
Absolutely.
The buyer's job is not done, the agent's job is not done. There's a management process that has to continue on all the way through the closing date.
Absolutely. There's a lot of moving parts, and I always say the buyer's agents earn their keep managing those details and seeing that the buyer's interests are continue to be protected as they move forward into settlement so they can get the keys for their new home.
Thank you, Tracy. All excellent information, and definitely take this to heart and understand a lot of the process that Tracy's talked about to make sure that your contract that you write is covered in detail to protect you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Tracy.
Maybe. We'll put it in the computer. Look at it. So you can charge a little bit.
What'd you say?
Yeah, it's still rolling.